Hello and good evening. Welcome to Collective Encounters, the educational program for the UTA Fine Art Collections. We're pleased to be here with you after such a long and distant pause. My name is Cheryl Mitchell. I am the collection specialist who manages the fine art collections. I'm also an art historian who supports the art history area, museum studies, and the visual resources currently within the art and art history department. And we are very excited to have you here this evening for our specialty event. The UTA Fine Art Collections began as a varied series of holdings across the campus over the past many decades. Primarily held here in the Art and Art History department, it focused primarily on student and faculty works. However, the future of the fine art collections began to transform through a series of donations by personal research collections of local anthropologists, geologists, biologists, and many of them our co-workers and colleagues here, beginning in 2009. Very quickly thereafter, many alumni and more individuals across the DFW and Texas region took note and also became prominent donors of their collected works, hoping to share them with the future generations of mavericks. We have now grown to 13 distinct collections within the fine art collection category with a variety of media and genres. We are particularly proud of the scope of our collections as an ethnographic research resource that includes cultures from across the world, and we strive to represent the breadth of diversity that makes up our campus population. Our Collective Encounters educational program includes 3 semesterly exhibitions, lecture and roundtable discussion formats, as well as curricular enhancement within both the gallery and classroom via hands-on experiences with objects from the collections. These experiences provide opportunities for an immediate, tangible connection with their studies. Seeing yourself in the tangible creativity of the world's history makes a difference in how our students find their place in this very large, multifaceted world. Inclusive historical representation matters. Our exhibitions often challenge them to think beyond the outdated stereotypes and mindsets of the past and encourages them to seek change for themselves and to provide a voice to the cultures they descend from. Our mission in the FACS is not only to provide stewardship of the many varied art forms here on the campus, but also to embrace a leading role in fostering scholarly study and research opportunities that can only be found through the direct connection and interaction with works of art themselves. How many times have you been into a museum and were told, "Don't touch, don't get too close"? Or when in a lecture, how often do you wonder what the true size of an artwork is versus that of the 50-foot lady that you see on the screen? It distorts the realities and the context of the artworks. And here in the UTA Fine Art Collections, we seek to change that. Students actively participate in the care of the artifacts and artworks in our holdings, and they participate in the entire process of the exhibitions, encouraged to feel the history in their hands. This instills a sense of confidence in them that can only be gained from handling art and its history. Dually, our vision for the future is to continue UTA's strong tradition of connecting our surrounding communities with superb art forms. And in doing so, our community outreach program, Art Active, offers our students the opportunity to become involved in campus organizations through service learning by donating their time and support towards off-campus groups as well. Here you can see some of our recent graduates participating in hosting our annual booth to share their knowledge and experience with both the campus and visiting AISD K-12 students. Tonight's roundtable offers the opportunity for extended conversation over the UTA facts, our goals and efforts, and we encourage you to inquire and become a part of our community. We need you and your support and look forward to speaking with you further later this evening. And speaking of community, I would be remiss if I did not offer thanks and acknowledge our contributing partners, our leaders here on campus our outgoing President Tech Lim, Provost Pranesh Aswara, VP of Administration and Campus Operations John Hall, the leaders of the College of Liberal Arts, current Interim Dean Dan Kavanaugh, as well as thank you to all of my colleagues and students, family and friends who have been incredibly supportive for my often very lofty goals for the UTA Fine Art Collections. Thank you all for sponsoring campus tours, art commissions for student and faculty alike, funding our burgeoning public art program, and most of all, a willingness to include the arts and humanities in the university's strategic missions, recognizing the importance that our studies have in fostering our future generations. And now, I am pleased to introduce you to another of our major contributing partners, to whom I offer my thanks, Dr. August Jordan Davis, our chair of the Art and Art History Department, and my co-curator for our exhibition, Rubrication, Selections from the Palmeri Goodstein Print Collection, and your host for this evening's In Conversation with the Collector.
Thank you, Cheryl. Well, I'd like to start by thanking all of you for giving your time to us this evening. We're so pleased to see everybody here and so many faces that maybe some of you we haven't seen in a while, and this is great to be back in person for an event like this. But most of all, I'm really thankful to have Nancy Palmeri here with us in person. This is just such a treat. I met Nancy in April 2019 when I was here interviewing to be the chair of the department. And when I was back in England and found out I would be coming here to Arlington, I then got the very bad news that Nancy wasn't going to be here when I got here. And I thought, what have you done? But you scarpered, but now we got you back. So we're so thrilled to have her for this evening, this very special chance to talk about the wonderful collection that you and your husband Ron put together and donated to UTA. And we've got a series of prepared questions for the In Conversation. And then after we go through kind of our prepared discussion points, we'll have time for questions from all of you for Nancy. So thank you so much for being here.
Sure, totally my pleasure. You know, I want to say thanks to all of you who are here. You know, leaving was a struggle just because you guys are my family. And so I came here when I was really young. And I came up as an academic here. And so it's really nice to sort of come home to my family and see all you guys. I'm especially grateful for the people who are retired and came back because, you know, that's not always easy. So I really appreciate that as well. So thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of context before I jump into the questions. Cheryl first mentioned, early in the pandemic, because I can still picture that we were on one of those dreadful Zoom team calls, and we were talking about the collections plans, and she said, well, we have this wonderful new collection that we are getting ready to start bringing into the fold, as it were. We haven't really processed it yet, but this amazing donation that Nancy and her husband Ron have given to us of these print works, and they're incredible, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And before she could finish speaking, I remember, because I can picture Benito was in that call, and so was Mary, and I jumped in, I said, right, I'm just going to volunteer myself. I'd like to have a chance to curate from that collection. This sounds really exciting. And so that began a multi-year process of us working together, sifting through all the incredible range of work that's in this collection. So that's really inspired us. We've only picked a very tiny corner to look at, but we anticipate there being many, many more exhibition opportunities from this rich collection that you guys put together. So with that context in mind, I guess let's step it back to what really inspired you guys to begin this process of such dedicated collecting in the first place.
You know, I think for me, all of that started when I went to college as an undergraduate. And the way I got into being a printmaker was wandering around trying to figure out, because my parents didn't really help me figure out college because that's not what my parents did. It wasn't in their wheelhouse, right? So I'm wandering around trying to figure it out, and this little short guy, bald guy, comes up to me and says, "You should take printmaking." And I'm like, okay. So I took it. And I didn't even know what printmaking was because we certainly didn't do that in my high school, right? Yeah. So once I got into printmaking, I got really excited because it was a community studio space. The graduates and undergraduates were working together, and they introduced me to the idea of a multiple, right? So, and the import of a multiple, not only in terms of when you're a professional and you make an edition, you can exhibit it in lots of different places, right? At the same time, almost, right? But the multiple was democratic, right? It allowed us in-house to share, to trade. And so right away out of the starting gate, I started to get invited to participate in portfolios. Most of these were friends getting together and coming up with a topic, and then everybody making an addition of the number of people who were in the portfolio. And then as I started to get more sophisticated with my work and go further on in my education, I started to really recognize, okay, the portfolio is really significant here. And really I recognized it as the start of my collection, right at that point. And they were, some of the early prints that I collected, some of my own early prints are in them, and I'm embarrassed to look at them now, but it's like they were my friends who were in my studio with me when I needed support. I had sentimental value associated with them. When I was stuck doing something in my studio, I can open a portfolio and look at what my really cool artist friend did here. And it also was like, okay, how do I up the ante for myself? Because when I look at all these prints that are done, mine maybe falls at 50%. Well, no, I got to be better than that. So I would continually try to up the ante, both technically and conceptually. So that's pretty much how my collection started. And then when I got to teaching, I recognized the value of a teaching collection. So, as my reputation as a print artist got better, my invitation to more prestigious portfolios and exhibitions got to be more plentiful. So I started to acquire things that were important in the field, but also in art in general. I was probably an early collector of the artist Zhu Bing, which some of you probably know now. He's this great Chinese artist who made these beautiful, invented language things. I knew Zhu Bing when he was in graduate school. And we were in graduate school at the same time at different institutions. And I still have one of Zhu Bing's early prints that's just a straight print. It has an invented language, but it's not one of those beautiful scroll things. Although I really love that, but I can't put that in my house. So, I got a really great opportunity to kind of jump in on the cusp of that kind of stuff. So.
Well, that's so exciting.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting for us as educators is to think about that way in which students, we want to foster these opportunities for them to self-generate that peer-to-peer kind of pace setting that you're describing, but also as educators to build those collections that we can then use. I know that Dr. Fletcher Coleman, for example, is doing exactly that with getting the students involved in the collecting of the East Asian prints that he is starting a new collection here, so that they've got that learning tool on hand and just the ability to have that one-to-one personal interaction with that range of skill and that range of technique and approach. That's one of the things that, having looked through all of your prints, I think we looked at all of them at least once or twice.
Yeah.
There's such terrific range of what is included, and it does look like it has this kind of organic beginning.
Yeah, it's really organic. I don't think I'm a collector in the traditional sense of like looking for things that are good for my bank book. Although I do have some things that are of pretty good value, but I don't really see them that way. You know, my husband and I always, like we had sentimental value for things, you know, especially artwork. And so we saw them as like family members. So, you know, we always I professionally framed everything. Everything's archival. But for me, you know, I have a Katie Kolowitz print. But I love that Katie Kolowitz print as much as my Kenda North photograph in my house, right? And so there's no like discrepancy between, okay, well, this is Katie Kolowitz, so this person needs to be under light, and and then I'm just gonna put Kenda over here, right? No, everything is kind of brought together because there's a different kind of love for the work. You know, I have a lot of graduate student work and undergraduate student work that I've carried with me everywhere, even as far back as graduate school. And it's still like, it's just part of my family. It's part of what I live with.
Do you think as a maker that that's part of that distinction because it speaks to you so directly that in a way that it might not with somebody who doesn't have that kind of hands-on approach?
I do. I mean, I was fortunate to sort of get plucked out of the, you know, cosmos and take printmaking because printmaking is really a unique place. And there are lots of people who make prints. Most of them, at least let's say in the like blue chip world, most of them don't really go to printmaking because they love the material, because they probably never touched the material. Most of them go to it because it's a way to garner more. It's like their calling card that they can spread out and get more resources from or in more collections. But that's not how I came to print. I came to print because I loved it and I learned it from the inside out. So, you know, I came to print just for those reasons and I've always stayed and loved it. But that doesn't mean that even while I was here teaching, I never was somebody who was trying to create a legacy. And so I thought it was always really important to be collaborating with other faculty and trying to figure out how printmaking fit into painting and how printmaking fit into photography, right? So I always tried to figure out how I could adapt the materials so that I could show the students the relevancy of the process within the context of the things that they were doing, maybe as their majors. So, you know, that was always really important to me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, speak a little bit, if you don't mind, about what it was like as a couple collecting. Like at that stage, how did your approach to selecting works maybe change?
Well, you know, I still liked what I liked, and Ron liked what he liked, and a lot of times I didn't like what he liked. But sometimes I did. You know, he had this really unique upbringing. So he grew up in Brooklyn. And his parents were kind of well-to-do. So they would schlep Ron to Sotheby's in the 60s and early 70s. So you could buy Picasso prints and Dürer prints for nothing. And so his family actually, when his family passed away, we discovered a lot of prints and some drawings that were for real. And so, you know, they sort of got divided up among the family members, but I can remember seeing, you know, signed Dali prints at his mom's house. And so they really like surrealist work. They love Miro. Of course, Chagall, it's a Jewish family, so like Chagall was like the shit. So, you know, they didn't have any signed Chagalls, but they had some lithographs that were unsigned. And so, you know, I think in this collection, there's a Raphael Sawyer drawing, which is actually a real Raphael Sawyer drawing. So, and, you know, they let me have it. I was like, okay. I told them what it was so I wouldn't feel like I was cheating them. But, you know, I have a Raphael Sawyer drawing in this collection. So, you know, when we got together, it's really kind of, then it sort of becomes about compromise a little bit, about, like, I got to make sure that some of the things that Ron loves are here. And he was collecting prints at he had 2 of them, like a beautiful silkscreen print that's that you have it now. And I can't remember the other thing. So we started to learn to compromise a little bit. And then, I think being together, I got really savvy about IT, and he got really savvy about print. And so he started finding prints that he knew I would love. And so our tradition for many, many years is that either on an anniversary or a birthday, mostly my birthday, he would buy me a print of like greater value. So I have, several Kiki Smith prints in my house. I have some Leslie Dill prints in my house. We've got the Kolowitz print. So he started getting really savvy. And he, like some of the dealers he would buy them from knew him by name. So yeah. And which, by the way, I just told Cheryl this. I'm still collecting, so there's still more prints to send. So, and I,
keep us in business for some time.
Right. And I know that there's Fletcher's doing the Asian collection. I do have some prints that are Japanese, and I've been waiting to figure out whether they need to come here or go elsewhere. So now I know that Fletcher's here, so I can send those Japanese. Yeah. That's great. So, but I've already been told, we got to work with development, which, like, the pandemic, unfortunately, has brought like much more minutia and bureaucracy to the universities. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's a different conversation.
Yeah, totally different conversation. But I can't. I have zines too. I'm
well,
like
that was
just
my
mass
next
collector
question. Was tell us about the zine collecting, and was that you or was that Ron's?
Oh, me.
Focus. Okay.
Totally me.
So
I don't think Ron knew what a zine was before we met. I actually stumbled on zines because of my students, and this was probably in the late '90s, early 2000s, and they started asking me, "Do you know what zines are?" And I was like, "Well, no." And they started to explain to me that it was like this way of self-publishing and for people to trade, right? And so. Around 2000, I curated an exhibition of zines with some students here at a national conference that literally was, I invited hundreds of artists to make zines, and then we created a kind of mock library environment at this conference. And so all of those zines are part of this collection. So that sort of started my collection. Ron's purchase some zines that are his interest, like Star Trek zines and stuff like that. And they're zines, and I have them, right? And I have them, and I really love them because they're really quirky and odd. But yeah, whenever he would see a zine, he's like really proud. Yeah, that's a zine. And I'm like, okay. And so, but he would actually pick them up here and there whenever he traveled as well. So I like zines for the same reason I think prints are really important, because they're democratic. It's a way, and I always tell students this, it's like, you can be a collector. You don't have to be a collector of Matisse. You can collect your peers around you. This is like fertile ground. So every semester in every course that I teach, we have a trade project. Nice. So we just did a project with zines and scratch boards, because I don't teach printmaking anymore because I'm not the printmaker at the school. And that's totally fine by me, but I do teach book art still. And so, we did a project where we did zines, and they knew what they were, but they had no idea what the potential was for, so they get to learn how to make a really fast folded zine, and then they learn how to make a paper box, and they have something that they can show their mom and dad. And so, but they're really excited about it because it's a collection, and I tell them it's the start of your collection. So, and they're like, oh my God, that's totally true. So, so yeah.
Well, in an adjacent fashion, do you have an interest in either making, and perhaps this is my ignorance and you perhaps already do, and or collecting artist books?
I do collect artist books, and there's some artist books that you have. And yes, I am. It just depends. I have to be really compelled by something to want to collect it, right? And I'm not the kind of person who mulls that over a lot. I'll spend a lot of time buying a pair of shoes, but if I see a piece of art, and and it's resonating, then I go find out about it. I go figure out how I can collect it. You know, and most of the time it's like student work or my colleagues' work, but I feel like, you know, for me, that's an investment for me, like in my life, because it does, you know, I'm really happy looking at this work every day. And I do spend, I would say, at least 10 minutes a day walking through my house and like greeting all of my work, because most of the people I'm greeting are people I know. Right? They're people I've worked with, or I remember helping them work on this piece, or, you know, and I always really try to facilitate printmaking for faculty here too, whenever I could, whenever there's time.
Well, that leads really nicely to another question that we have, which is some of our audience here won't be familiar with this. Can you talk us through the origin of Wild Pony and kind of the spirit of what that was intended to be?
Well, you know, there was a space that had gotten emptied, you know, and those of you probably remember it used to be the Corral, right? We used to get crappy Pizza Hut pizza there. And the space right next to it was the first printmaker here was Bill Spurlock, and he was the biggest pack rat you ever want to meet. But he had this monstrosity embossment machine, and that's right. So the space was part of the department. And so I was like, I want to use this space. I want to set up letterpress, right? Because letterpress is something that's sort of has become critically vital to design curriculum and also printmaking curriculum and just art curriculum in general. And so, you know, we managed to get out this thing, and we had to like have the window removed, and this giant crane had to come and take this thing out. And then we had to clean the space, and then I had to find a letterpress. And so, you know, when I was in graduate school, you could find a letterpress for $200. And I was like, oh yeah, no problem. And so when I start going online, I'm like, holy guacamole, they want $2,000 for this thing that needs total refurbishing. At the time, we had this great person here, Don Beck. Don Beck was like a master. And so, yeah. And so Don, and I can't remember who the other guy was, but he was a machinist who worked for Don, what? James, yes. We got the plans for the press that are, I guess they're proprietary now. So this company that's really savvy about letterpress owned these plans. So we had to pay for these plans, get them here, and then that machinist and Don refurbed the press that's in there. And so when design started to really also kind of move away from like analog stuff to digital. What was that guy's name? Don Arday. He had type cases and a small proof press, and he wanted to get rid of it. And I was like, I'll take it. And for many years, I just had it in the print studio because I couldn't really set it up. Well, I set it up. So now we have cases of type in there. There's an old German just proof press in there. But really, once I got started, it was right around the time that the graduate program started. And so I went out looking for a graduate student who appreciated, understood, and can do letterpress printing. And that was Sid Webb. And Sid Webb was the person who named it Wild Pony Edition. So Sid and her mom, because Sid grew up with her mom, who's a professional letterpress person. Excuse me. So that's how it got started.
Because it sounds like it also encapsulated that idea of sharing editions, of collaboration, of offering opportunities to pitch together.
Well, we wanted to make it like an entrepreneurship thing. And I wanted the students to run it. And so I sort of mentored it. But the idea was that a graduate student would be the director of the space. And every time we switched graduate students, so I always had one graduate student who was directing it and one who was interested in it for institutional memory. Yeah. And then I always participated in it. And so, you know, it started out with working with faculty, getting faculty engaged, and I realized people really liked it. So then we turned it into a business, and we started to print postcards. We kept that open as a shop. We made gifts for the president so he would know that we were freaking here. And then we started getting commissions from the president's office to make cards and stuff like that. But the expertise, I knew letterpress, but not as well as Sydney did. And so the expertise came from Sid. And she's the one who actually really helped. And it's exactly what I wanted, which was like this real collaboration between students and faculty. And once it got running, and then David, of course, was the next person who took it over, and he really made some changes and added some really good innovations. And then I just pretty much stepped back, and I attended all of the team meetings, but they did all the work. So I just promoted it as best as I could.
That's great.
So, yeah.
Well, letterpress is kind of a nice bridge to the curatorial framework that I put on the show of this idea of rubrication. And I've written an overly long, unedited piece that you can get in the VRC all about what I got so excited about. And I kind of went down this rabbit hole looking back at that moment in the 15th century where you have those scribal manuscript practices meeting up against the incipient printing revolution and movable type coming in, with Gutenberg and people like William Caxton, and this real transition starting to happen, but where the idea of like that hand inking and going back in and rubricating a work by hand because you can't yet do two-color printing successfully or easily or affordably. It's so interesting to me how some of those emphases, the way in which color features within print composition to such an extreme way, especially with something as powerful as the color red, and how that can still play out within contemporary, print artwork.
Oh, sure.
That just kept coming across because every time we would go and we'd look again at the collection and what we'd pulled for the long list, I just kept being so drawn by the really marvelous selection that you had where red was this standout, element. And I guess my question for you is, how conscious were you over time as the collection grew of recognizing certain kind of thematic attractions that you must have had, at least subconsciously, when you were acquiring them?
Well, I don't know about thematic, but I think for me, the more graphic, the better. And that pretty much comes from the fact that I make relief prints, right? And so when we start talking about, like if you start talking about Durer, I just get like super excited. I just had to give a lecture to students on that, and I know they thought I was gonna fly away because I was like waving my arms around and talking about Durer. But I mean, for me, the more graphic, the better. But again, but I can't really say that is a standard for me though, because I really love subtlety. Like I love sublimeness in print, so because I don't do this as well as I wish I could. I have friends who can make etchings that just make you cry. Yeah, they do, because they're just this amazing insight into something, right? So I'm a sucker for bright colors too. So I went to the Amon Carter today, by the way, to see that exhibition, and it's just like candy. It was candy.
Is this the printed revolution?
Yeah, and it's funny that you're talking about red, because if I go back to that show and I think about red, and my understanding of red is almost always based on propaganda. It's almost always and for print, that's red. That's what red is. Like it's really about a message. So whenever I see red, I don't think about danger or anything. I just think about like, this is calling you to attention, right? Absolutely. Yeah. So, and I even talked about like the Gutenberg Bible, and these are like non-majors, so they have no idea what the heck that is. But, it's really interesting to talk to them about the idea that, Durer, if you think about Durer, he was so facile as a draftsman and a painter, but he made prints, right? So of course he comes from a goldsmith's tradition, but his wife was his manager, and his wife was like, okay, you can make a lot of these so we can make money, right? And then at some point, he's making imagery that other people are carving and putting his signature on. So that's pretty much how print shops work. Right? So, I know this quirky little story that Durer's wife he started to dabble in making dry points. And I don't know if you guys know what dry points is, but those are direct plate prints, right, in which the printmaker is creating the image not only from the incised line, but from the burr that gets raised outside of that line. So you can imagine that if you take your key and go along your car, which is a horrifying thought, it's rough, right? But over time, it's not rough anymore. What that means is that the burr breaks, and so the dry point is no longer viable. So there's that, and then you have to print them with a press, which is exerting like a half a ton of pressure on a metal plate. So she wouldn't let him do it because he couldn't make enough of them to make money. And so, you know, he made a few. There's very few of those prints that exist of Durer's dry points. So, you know, so there's the monetary side of that. But again, for those of us who are in academia making prints, that's not a consideration for me. I don't really think about like how many I can sell. So, you know, I just, and then I, you know, my thematic, there's no real thematic, like I'm gonna have only bird prints, you know. To me, it's like, I want graphic things, and I want to represent, really, if I'm thinking about a theme, I want to represent as much technique in print as I can. And that goes all the way back to being an educator. And like, you know, when I show a student, okay, I talk about an intaglio, I tell them what it means, I tell them what its attributes are, and then I can take an intaglio print out and let them touch it. And they can run their fingers along the surface of it, and then they understand that aspect of the process, so.
Well, I mean, I think that's part of the wonderful aspect of making a handling collection, is because you help demystify this process for students. And speaking of Dürer, years ago, oh gosh, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, the British Museum had this wonderful exhibition of Dürer. And what was so interesting is they made this chronological display, and they started with work when he was very young as a student, effectively. Yeah. And he was rubbish at doing hands, and I couldn't believe it. And I thought, this is the one to bring students to, because you got to see that access of skill and talent over time, and all the effort that went into becoming what we all think of as Dürer in the mind's eye. And so there's an element of that, of kind of pulling back the curtain, as it were, for students to really understand intimately what goes into getting these skills to such a high level.
I mean, exactly. I think that's a really good point, because, you know, you can put, and I just did this by slide because unfortunately I don't have any Dürers, but you can take a Dürer engraving and a Dürer relief print, woodcut, and put them side by side, and they are the same skill level drafting, but they don't have the same kind of tonality. You know, an engraving has this really silvery quality. There's a lot of tonal range, and a woodcut has to rely on the play of pattern on a flat surface. So it's just really different. They have a very different impact. So, you know, and when you show those to students, because they're not really thinking about it, they're like, oh my God, that's totally right. So, you know, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I have one more question before we open it up to everybody. And this is slightly different, and I hope you don't mind my asking, but do you mind sharing with us what you're currently doing in your own practice? Are you making are you yeah, I know. But are you getting time to make prints? Are you making other kinds of work?
Right now I'm making other kinds of work, but just very, very recently I'm like, you know, I think I'm ready to make some prints again. And so, but I think, you know, my work has really shifted. I worked primarily narrative, figurative, and at some point I was like, you know, this is getting way too easy for me. I can do it. I can do it well. I can, and you know, again, I'm not trying to like tap myself, but I can almost always get something in an exhibition, right? And it was just, I was not excited about it. So I shifted, and I really started taking a long look at some things, and so I started working on paintings, and I've been painting ever since, but I'm not painting, although I admit I bought some oils. I've tried the oils once and I'm terrible at it, but we'll master it. But I have been now for probably almost 10 years painting with flaché paints, which are French vinyl sign paints. And what I really like about them and I work like a screen printer on my paintings. I don't work like Marilyn. I work like a screen printer, right? Layer by layer by layer by layer by layer, right? I don't like to mix colors on the surface. So so they have the paint I love because it has a very saturated matte quality, and when you get enough layers of black, the black is like, you know, what's the name of that guy who owns the blackest black?
Kapoor.
Yeah, so, which is a load of koopy. But it's like, you know, it is so black that it's just like, you get lost in it. And so, yeah, I was working on very large scale paintings. So, I mean, large, like maybe a little bit smaller than half the slide projection. But, I can't move those around. So I'm working, I mean, the scale right now, I was working on about 30 by 40. And now my scale's probably like about this big. And I just, you know, when my husband got ill, and a lot of you know that Ron was, you know, had health issues. And then in the last 5 years, even while I was here, 5 years while I was here, his health was in decline. And so I kind of had to step back a little bit from traveling and shipping work and stuff like that. And I took over administrative responsibilities. And, you know, that was like, whoa, that's a lot of work. So, you know, and recently, you know, my husband's passed away, and so it took me a little while, and then I was like, I think I'm ready to like go back to that, because all throughout this pandemic, I kept an active studio practice. And these guys all know me. I've always had an active studio practice. I've always worked. But they've, you know, all my studio faculty, they've always been like really good examples to me because they always maintained an active studio practice too. So even when we weren't like, because we weren't like the research institution when I first got here that we are now, everybody still maintained an active studio practice. So to me, that was like a really fine example of how to remain professional. But I've always had a really intense work ethic. And so now I don't get to work as much. And I shifted to making paintings and drawings because prints take a long time. And so I was like, I don't have a lot, I like to work in 8 and 10 hour days. Well, maybe a couple weeks. I'm a little older now, so maybe not so much. But I work, you know, paintings, I can go downstairs for an hour in my studio, work, and then go do something else. So yes, I still have an active studio practice. I want it to be more active, but you know, I can't. You know this. It's really hard.
Yeah,
so it's really hard. Yeah, exactly. So there we are.
Oh, well, Nancy, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, we've got time now for questions. Yeah, please.
Thank you.
Do we have any audience questions?
No questions? Yeah.
Me?
Yeah, Leah.
Okay. Sorry, I thought it was so I just wanted to ask, so was it always a thought that you were going to donate it to an institution?
You know, yes. And actually, long before August got here, Cheryl and I were talking about this 5, 6, 7 years ago, and just trying to figure out the semantics of it. You know, didn't even have a flat file drawer. So where will we put it, right? And to be honest with you, most of the time that I was in Texas, that collection sat in the print studio. So students could open the drawers anytime and look at whatever they wanted. And not a single time did anyone ever steal a print, which I got really worried about at some points, but then I was like, it's okay, I'm fine. So, I mean, I even, like Mel Chin came here many, many years ago, and he did a project in the print studio. So he did a collaboration with the students that was kind of interesting. But then he gave me this t-shirt with this alien on it. And he said, there's something really special about this shirt, and it's related to you. And so I sat there for a minute, and I was like, well, I never talked about aliens with this man. And then I realized that the tag was letterpress printed.
Nice.
And so I think it's in the collection. Yeah. So, you know, so everything that I everything that I collected, I always was mindful that eventually it would become part of the university collection. So, and Ron was always like, oh, really excited about it. And then when I was leaving, he was like, okay, so you have two choices now. You can bring the collection with you and give it to Southeast, or you can leave it here. And I was like, well, that's not really a choice. Why would I give it to Southeast? I mean, I collected all these prints mostly while I was here, and this is where I learned how to be a teacher. So, so I felt like, and I have really great memories of my colleagues, like thousands of amazing students. So I felt like it needed to stay here. And he was happy with that. He was excited about it.
Well, we're thrilled that it's here, and our students are so lucky that it's here.
Yeah.
It's
I
really
feel pretty
great.
lucky that it's here too. So.
Yes.
What?
Who is the bald short guy that I want to know? That you talk about on the very first today?
His name is Robert Malone, and he was really well known in the 60s as a printmaker. And he was this really bizarro, funny, quirky guy. He went home at lunch at the same time every day. We used to tease him because he's like, cheese sandwich, tomato soup every day. In the afternoon, he would go for a jog. But he needed enrollment in his class. His class was not meeting the enrollment. And he saw me wandering around, and he was like, you should take printmaking.
So you went into printmaking because you had a pulse. That's basically. So the other thing I was going to ask you about, when in collecting, in honing out a focus for a collection, are there things that you have deliberately eliminated from the possibility of collecting because you want to focus on?
Oh, gosh, no.
So you're just broad-based about everything.
Well, the prints are the things I have the most of and have engaged the most personally. But I was telling, I think Mary or maybe Cheryl, I'm collecting ceramics now, which, I mean, is like functional things, sculptural things, just, I've always been really interested in like maiolica and all of those things. So, my grandmother like had all these weird little like tea things and stuff. I was always really fascinated. And, like in the 20s, it was like those, what's that bright blue stuff that you could, huh? It's like, I think it's like glass or ceramic. I can't remember what it was. I have tons of those. So I'm always really interested in it. So, and now I'm in a place where I now have a very large house. I normally, my friends know I like mid-century houses that you have to fix, and my husband was like, please, can we buy a new house? So I was like, okay, and he picked out the house. It's really big, so I have lots of space now to buy objects. And so, but even while I was here, I was buying sculptures from MFA students, or trading them with my work. So I'll never take a work from a student without giving them one of my pieces. But those were always pretty small. But I just bought one of the students' work from Southeast, and it's like this big giant ceramic thing. No idea where I'm gonna put it, but I saw it once and I kept thinking about it. So finally and for me, that's like paying it forward, right? Like, okay, I'm gonna buy student work because it's gonna help them like pay their rent this month, but I get to have this work, right? So, it's paying it forward. So, but, I have lots of our graduate student works, and our graduate students over the years have been so great, and I've got tons of their work. When I left here, like my colleagues gave me work. It was like the nicest thing ever. So, I don't know if you know Spencer Evans, but I have one of his self-portraits, and so, it makes me really happy. And then, I get the opportunity to call these people 10 years down the road and say, hey, would you be a visiting artist? I've already had Spencer come and do a lecture. So, it just like paying it forward. It's just like your community keeps expanding. So no, long answer, no. I'm also really interested in painting now. So I've started collecting painting a little bit. But I like contemporary stuff, and I do like stuff that, I think will it shows great potential. And so again, I value student work as much as I value stuff that fancy collectors collect. So. Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned collecting work from students and especially exchanging work with students. Are there many other specific kinds of places or circles where you find these pieces that resonate with you and collect?
Are you an art student?
Art history.
Yeah. No. Well, I will tell you that it's easier to be a collector of student work when you're a student if you're making work with the students. However, you have a pretty cool skill, right? So you could write about their work and trade that for what you like. Almost always an art student will tell you, yeah, right? So let's say you have a BFA student having a show, and you want to write something about them to have it published, right? You have a campus newspaper, so it's like you could do a review and trade that review for a piece of artwork. So I come from this group. Printmakers are really scrappy, and they do lots of trading and bartering for skill. So I traded a print once for a kitten, right? Yeah. So there's lots of things that can happen. No, I gave the print to get the kitten. Right. I also, in graduate school, I was really poor, right? Some of you grad students probably know that. Maria, poverty. But I traded a print for a crappy bicycle so I could get around. So, that's what's really wonderful about the print world, is that people still barter with each other. David Diaz was the master of okay, I'm gonna make this screen print for you. Can I have that heater in return? Yeah, sure. So,
and who knows what Switzerland's experiencing right now?
No. Although I do know David has already, before he left, he hasn't left yet. He contacted the collaborative print studios there and was already in touch. Was already trying to work out something with me.
Oh, he was already in touch with them in October.
Yeah, he was like, you want to do something? You want to will you come visit me? I'm like, yeah, I'll come visit you.
I love it.
So yeah, but that is something where he's tied printmaking into his social responsibility. And so, and it's always about collaboration and building group.
Community.
Yeah, community. So I would go for it. Do it. Have you taken any art classes yet?
I have taken art classes. I was asking less about how do I do this.
Could you take your mask down? I'm sorry, I'm old.
I wasn't asking to collect myself. I was asking because I was curious. You were talking a lot about your experiences in university and among students. I was wondering, outside of that, what was it like? Or was it galleries? Was it art fairs?
You mean outside of my university life?
Yeah.
That's a really hard question because I've been in school since I was 5. So, the university is kind of part of my DNA. But I do go to art fairs. I go to museums really regularly. So if I see something at a museum that I really love, obviously I can't knock on the curator's door and say, so what do you want for this, right? But I can go look that person up and see if there's things that they have that are affordable for me, right? So I don't know if you know who Sue Coe is. She's a really, really well-known person, and her prints are totally about social responsibility, and she doesn't really care that much about it for the sake of art. It's really about raising the resources to contribute to the things that she believes in. I seen her work in museums, and I was like, I don't think I can't do this, right? And this was when I was a grad student. And then when I graduated with my MFA, my major professor gave me a Sue Coe print. And I was like, I think I could probably buy this. So I go online and I find that she sells these things for $40, $20. So you could buy a print, original signed print by Suco. And there's an artist who's on like Facebook right now who's making these paintings and selling them for like $20. And she's really well known in the art world, right? So it comes down to research, right? So you have to go see what you like and go find it, or find something that gets close to it so that you can live with it and be happy with the acquisition. So, but, take every opportunity to go to art fairs, museums, and just look people up. So that's what I've always done. And it's certainly if it's out of my financial range, then, I can just cry about it and then buy a catalog. Because I'm also, unfortunately, a glutton for books. And so, they've been really valuable to me personally, but also to share with students. I've lost a lot of books that way, but I guess, it was sort of in the cosmos that student needed to keep that book, and they needed it for whatever. So, but I always tell my students, I have lots of friends in my studio, Michelangelo's in my studio, Kiki Smith is in my studio, but I have 2 studios too. I have this studio as well. So I spend a lot of time thinking about work before I actually make it. So, and then I just act on it. So you gotta be enterprising.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, and the worst that happens is they might say no.
A lot of times they don't though, especially when you're a student.
Exactly.
So,
Do we have a question here?
Ms. Nancy, I was going to ask, due to your profession, have you ever been invited to, well, I assume that you have, to some well-known workshops or maybe fairs in which you have to write a article of your perspective or evaluate of like what you saw in that fair or in that
Yes.
in that gallery?
Yeah, I have.
How is that like?
Stressful. The workshops are never stressful, and I've done hundreds of workshops. They're not stressful because they're almost always tied into, and I insist that students help me print. And that's the only way that a student can learn. It kind of follows that sort of master-apprentice model. And for many years while I was here, I did not have my own studio. I worked in the print studio with the students. And a lot of us did. And that was really beneficial to them because they could ask you questions, sometimes annoying because you're trying to work. But you always kind of take that with a little grace because, you know that they're curious, and that curiosity is going to continue to keep them as practitioners, right? So every time I went to teach a workshop, it was always to make an edition. I would have student assistants all the way through, and then I always insisted on giving each student a print from the edition. So nobody's ever worked for me without getting a print. And that's really important to me. So in terms of giving, I've written reviews about other people's work. I can't write a review of my own work. I've written articles. So I've done, research presentations. I've presented at different conferences across the world that are not necessarily, they're not printmaking specific. They could be like service learning specific because I'm really committed to that kind of thing. So, so it's stressful, but I totally will tell you that you should do it. And that's the thing we try to train students for. That's why you have to write statements. That's why you have to speak aloud. It's because we're trying to teach you how to be disseminators as well as practitioners. Because nobody's going to like art unless you guys go out and talk about it in a way that people can understand. So, and that's really all about print for me. Like those are images that people can possess and they can understand, right? Sometimes.
This is your going, gone moment. Any last questions?
Yes.
This is my last one, I promise.
No problem.
Has there been a print that you have done in the past where just because of the, I guess, that personal affection that you have for that piece, that you want to make it just limited because it's just that personal?
Just what? I'm sorry?
Like if you have ever made a print that is like very limited, like there's only 4 of them or 5
No,
somewhere.
but I don't make editions that are 100 either. You know, I usually, the max edition I will make is 50 usually, and usually I'm making that scale of an edition because I'm in a portfolio or because I've been invited to contribute by contract printer, right? So, and I've had contract printers work with me, but I can't let them print my work, right? I have to participate, and it's not because I'm a, like a, what do you call that? Control freak, that's the word I'm looking for. It's really because I don't want to, like, I want to contribute, right? I don't want to sit there and be like, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. I have to be part of the process. So, so no, I mean, my typical editions are about 20 or 25. But again, it really just depends on the nature of the print. Like if I have to, because I make editions every time I work, and I don't work because I have an exhibition, I just work, right? And so when I'm making a print, I'm going to make 25 because that falls into the tradition of the medium, right? So I make prints not because you can broadcast them everywhere because you know, that's a great perk, but I like, you know, I fell into printmaking. I like the idea of following recipes, right? I come from this line of Italian people, right? And so my grandmother was this amazing cook, and I was always really fascinated by recipes. And she had them, but she never used her recipes. They were on these really dirty, gross index cards. And so I really gravitated towards the sort of science part of printmaking as well. So, but making the edition attaches me to the lineage, and that's the way that I see it. And I will always see it that way, you know, unless I get knocked in the head and it falls out of my head, but I'm always gonna see it that way. So no, and I don't make work that only stays in my house either. Most of us can talk about this as studio faculty. It's like after you make the work, you don't really want it around you anymore. You want it away from you, right? You know, and I talk to students all the time and they're like, oh no, I make work for me. And I'm like, no, you don't, because not entirely, because you don't just sit in your closet and look at it, right? You want somebody to look at it and reflect on it and talk about it and have it resonate, right? So that's a good question though.
Well, Nancy, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for this very generous
Thank
giving of your
you.
time. We really
Thank you,
appreciate
thank you. Thank you, thank you. So.
And thank you all so much and such great questions.